ROBA stands for reciprocal object-based aggression, and ROBA is kind of my theory of everything regarding what the human condition is, I guess. And the reason I zero in on reciprocal object-based aggression is because I'm an action designer and stuntman by trade, a fight choreographer, and a lot of my job is designing action scenes between a good guy and a bad guy, and I have to kind of take both of their sides. And if for some reason, if I'm not able to understand the intention behind violence, the intention behind evil, then I can't really make a good action scene. And so for my entire career, I've sort of had this perspective on people and on violence, which is like a little bit, maybe a little bit more objective and not very emotional. And that might have come before doing this. I just have never been very emotional about violence. Some might think that's a flaw. Maybe it's a feature. I don't know. And so as I hear so many people speak in the mainstream, in the sciences, they talk about, humans as though we're just animals. I hear this a lot. I understand what they mean by that. But when usually couched within that sentiment is this idea that like everything that humans do is just like a degree of difference from what animals do. And so they cite, for example, human language is just animal communication. It's complicated communication, right? Human kinship and family is just animal reproduction, right? They sort of draw this evolutionary line. Even religion, they'll say, human religion is just animal ritual. So geese have rituals when they go and they have mating rituals and all this, right? So what they do is they draw these kind of lines from, animal to human, and try and trace. It's kind of this mental exercise that they do where they'll trace, bird calls until that evolved into human music, right?
Sure.
And this is just, and I've just never quite like followed this line of thinking because it's such a huge leap of, in my opinion, faith to go between those two things. But I can kind of see their reasoning. And in the process, what they end up doing inevitably is that every human institution always begins then, if it's somewhere in between animal and human, right? If it's somewhere on that line, then every human institution starts out like having a utility first and foremost, and then it sort of becomes religious later, right? And it becomes religious so that we can kind of understand the world. And then around 1850, it goes back to being utilitarian again, right? And then we like
Hmm.
write ourselves again with Darwin. And I just find that to be a little bit cynical, right? Like this idea that, that maybe that's beyond the point, but the issue is that it's very difficult to make a case against that perspective because, if you have a more sort of sacred idea of language or a more sacred idea of music, I feel like you're just kind of speaking a different language. And you can't really argue against this, right? You can sort of just like you can kind of come up with a different origin story, and then you're not really speaking the same language. But the one thing that always puzzled me was that they would equate animal aggression with human aggression. And they tried to draw this, again, it's an evolutionary line from animals to humans. And I always thought, like in the back of my mind, like that the human violence can't possibly be like animal combat. It can't be anything like it because we're the only ones on this planet that could wipe ourselves out. As far as I know, there's no animal species whose combat is so deadly that they could wipe themselves out. Like, let alone even two animals just clashing, right? And when I talk about combat, I mean, kind on kind. So not hunting, but a buck fighting a buck or a chimp fighting a chimp, right? And these are wars of dominance or these combat of dominance. And like ultimately, animal combat is actually a very stable system. Zookeepers are always reminded not to interfere with this stuff, right? Like in chimpanzee exhibits, for example, When a new employee goes in to work at a chimpanzee exhibit, they have to be reminded not to step in and defend the poor hapless chimp, because that's just not how they work. And the hapless chimp is not going to die.
Hmm.
And that's the thing about humans, is that as soon as we see fists flying, we start to think like, oh no, what's next? Like, is a rock going to be thrown? Are they going to grab a gun? Is that going to turn into a war? Is that going to turn into a nuclear war? Right? We just kind of like extrapolate to infinity, like inevitably. And so humans are incredibly averse to violence in general, because we see this infinite potential apocalyptic threat. But animals
Hmm.
don't have this. So like, what exactly is that difference? And so I went looking for what exactly like the mechanical difference is between animal combat and human combat. And it's actually extremely simple. It's that humans can use objects within combat in a reciprocal way and animals can't. And even the smartest chimpanzee in the world can't and doesn't really use any objects in combat. They might wave a stick around, they might throw a rock, but that's always for intimidation. And no other chimpanzees really anticipate that that's going to be an issue anyway. It's never a hard blow. There's no improvement in technique. And then the other chimps don't gang up and start throwing stones too. It just doesn't happen, because if that did
Right.
happen, then you would have rock wars, and those don't happen. And in fact, we kind of have this weird Mandela effect with animal combat as well, where we seem to remember chimpanzees having weapons, and that's actually never happened. There's one or two instances of a chimp throwing a rock in a book,
Hmm.
and there's no proof that it really did anything. And this is sort of the foundation of like this Planet of the Apes fantasy that chimps are like just on the cusp of being humans. We just can't let them have weapons. And if that were true, then they would have rock wars. So Robo to me was this like very clear difference. Like, okay, humans have this, animals don't. And if there is some kind of path between the two, it's not really up to me to find what that is. They can find it, but I don't have to find it. All I have to do is point out the difference.